everyone. This is Lindsay with Flight Cleveland. We're excited to have you members joining us for our conversation today. In the room, we have Victor, your Flight Club manager, as you know. We have Mark Saramelli, who most of you guys know from various events here at Flight. And then we have Curt, who is the winemaker and owner of Liege and Groundwork, who you guys are going to be drinking some of the wines today in your wine release. So just to get everyone started, Curt, thanks. Joining us from Hawaii. So fun. Maybe
Yeah,
not
thanks for having
making
me
wine
on.
today. Hopefully not making wine today. Hopefully relaxing and enjoying
Totally.
yourself.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so Curt, you have found your way into the wine industry in maybe like the not totally traditional way. You're from California, but you did not grow up in the vineyards and around the wine culture. So tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into it.
Yeah, exactly. Believe it or not, I did not grow up in a household that drank wine at all. So at 19, I started working at Trader Joe's, and every couple weeks, our bosses would take us in the back and start giving us wine education, open some bottles. Um, they probably wouldn't be thrilled to be that this story is broadcasted that they're tasting 19-year-olds on wine, but that is literally what was happening back in the day.
Love Trader
In
Joe's.
between cigarette breaks in the back room and all kinds of stuff. It was 1992, so a little different times, but that's really where the bug started. And then, so I was 19 then, and then at 20, almost 21, I moved from Los Angeles to where I live now in San Luis Obispo to go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And again, wine wasn't on the radar at this point. I had a curiosity about it, but I studied business. And then while I was there going to school, I turned 21. I started going wine tasting, and I made a couple friends that were making wine, and I started helping them on the weekends. And that's really like where it started. I think I was just a little too good at helping, so I kept getting invited back. And then probably about 3 years of hanging out, one of my buddies one night just said, "When are you gonna make your first wine?" And it was like this crazy moment of like, I can do that, even though I'd been all around it, and like the people that was helping were pretty much my same age, but it just was never even a thought that I could make my own wine. Um, yeah, and that planted the seed. And so in 2003, I made 1 barrel of Grenache. So that was, let's see, and everybody wants to know usually what was your inspiration wine. So mine was a bottle of 1998 Clos de Pop. I remember
Mm.
having that wine, and that was like the aha moment of like, whoa, Grenache is really cool. I really like this. Um, and at this time too was the time of Sideways. So like I was down like in Santa Barbara County, helping people make wine. And so we were surrounded by a bunch of people making Pinot that were doing a great job and just, killing it because of the movie craze. Pinot was all the rage. Um, so for me, Grenache resonated for a lot of reasons. Like I thought it was awesome, beautiful. Like I love that, you can pair it with food or you can drink it on its own, in my opinion, and the medium body. But I kind of also liked at the time like the dark horse appeal of it. Like nobody was making domestic Grenache at that time. And I was like listening to music that not everybody was listening to and kind of like more into underground things. So to me it just seemed like a really good natural fit. And that's where it started. So yeah, 1 barrel of Grenache in '03, and the next year I got a little bit of Syrah, and then by year three I made enough to make a GSM, which was like the ultimate goal. But yeah, that's kind of the long story there.
Yeah, well, you answered a bunch of my questions about like, why Grenache? Obviously, you're a Rhone head in some respects, because you're using a lot of the same grapes in your wines. Um, what is so special to you about the Rhone varietals and where you're growing them? Because you're in the Central Coast. I know you're sourcing fruit from a few different places. How did you come to decide that you wanted to make these kinds of wines? And also, how do you it's a two-part question. How do you figure out who you want to work with? How are you finding these people? Obviously, I'm sure it's network and just being around it and getting to know people, but How do you make those selections and what are you looking for?
Yeah. So it all started 23 years ago, so it's not exactly one answer, but back then, it was really that Clos du Pop moment and deciding to seek that out. And I met a gentleman who had this like amazing vineyard. Like when you go out to it, is up at 3,200 foot elevation. It was just Grenache and Mourvedre, which you couldn't find at the time. And he needed some help in the vineyard. So it just became this whole like story of like, oh, I can help this guy in the vineyard. I can work on these vines with him, and I can get a little bit of fruit and make my first wine. Like it was just that magic combo. Um, and then from there, really the education started. And I think what I've learned is the Central Coast, which first of all is very deceiving because if you look on a map, I am not in the center of California, although we call it the Central Coast. Um, I really live in the middle of San Francisco and Los Angeles, but on the coast. The center of California is much higher, but we call the Central Coast basically Santa Barbara up to Paso Robles. So with time learning about that zone, and me living in San Luis Obispo, with hour drive north and an hour drive south, there is so much diversity of soils, climate. Um, there's just so much opportunity to work with these different types of Rhone varietals. So, like in the north, in the Rhone, you have cooler climate, which is where like Syrah comes from, and more of the whites. And so for me, I started learning, well, that zone is more typical to Santa Barbara County and even Edna Valley, right? And then the warmer zone was up in Paso. And then Paso itself is a whole other animal because, I think there's 13 different sub AVAs, but there are some cooler and warmer parts of Paso. Then you get into more of the calcareous soils. So really, it's just been a journey. And every time a new door was opened, I learned that there was a good fit for their own varietals. And I'm not saying that I figured it all out right away, but over time, I feel like I have a really good grasp of what I'm looking for and what fits in certain terroirs and certain climates within that 130-mile zone that I call home. Um, and then as far as like finding the places and the people, in the early times it was a lot of like hearing about things, going and visiting places, and then, borderline like begging people to sell you fruit. Um, and then the longer you get into the business, it starts working the other way, which is really cool. And you have people that come to you and want to work with you too. So to me, at this point, the place is great because it's got to get you excited. When you go to it, you got to have that feeling, but the people are a huge part of it, right? So, if I'm not aligned with someone in terms of like how they want to grow fruit or what they're looking for, um, usually within a year, maybe 2 years at most, we'll probably decide it's best to part ways because what I don't want to do is tell somebody how to do their job.
Right.
And I also don't want somebody telling me how to do my job. So, that symbiosis is really important. So, at this point, I would say the place is obviously at the top of the list, but the people are equally as important that you want to work with.
I mean, that's like life lessons, right? That's just in general. So,
For sure.
yeah.
For sure. I mean, I
Well,
always put it like really easy. It's like what I don't want is like when that phone call rings from that grower, and I'm gonna be like, ah, shoot, I don't want to talk to Mark right now, or vice versa. Like, oh
Yeah.
God, Kurt's calling me. What does he want? I want that like pick up the phone. What's up? How's it going?
yeah. No, that makes sense. Are there any growers that you've been working with from the beginning that you still have relationships with, or have you sort of had to work your way through and really find your people, or both?
Both,
Yeah.
both really. Not to be a downer, but like I lost one of my best friends last year,
Mm,
who was the grower at that first site that I got my Grenache from, and I'm still getting Grenache from. Um, That one really stung a bit. So yeah, I had my first harvest without him last year, which was crazy. But
I'm
yeah, there's
sorry.
definitely some old relationships and some new exciting ones too. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I mean, it seems like that the Central Coast is sort of I mean, endless. Just there's so much going on there. So it sounds like there's probably a lot of people that you can tap into. Have you ever gone outside of Central Coast for any of your sourcing grapes? Do you go, I know a lot of people end up going even further north. Is there any pull to go outside the Central Coast? Or are you pretty comfortable with the terroir and what you're doing there?
Yeah, I think right now I'm pretty comfortable. I have dabbled a little bit further north up into Monterey.
Okay.
I was lucky enough to get some Chalon Syrah. It was like
Oh,
65-year-old Syrah
neat.
2 years ago. So that was really cool from that historic site there. Um, but other than that, it's probably been mainly within there. I do have my eyes on a couple other places up there in Monterey. There's some terroir there that's like river cobblestones that looks like, the Chateauneuf area and surrounding. So I've been thinking about it, but I haven't pulled the trigger yet. That's probably going to be my next little venture.
Nice.
We'll keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
Not to get too off topic, but Chateauneuf de Pape was also my aha wine when I first was in the industry. And I have been to Clos de Pape, which was a total experience. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to go out there yet, but you should go. It is a really wonderful property. And it was a funny experience I had there. So
Really?
yeah, very comical. I had to talk my way in. They didn't want to see
Oh,
me. So
okay. What did you do to convince him to let you in?
so I was traveling by myself and I had rented like a service to take me around for the day so I could taste and drink and have fun and not have to worry about driving because just didn't want to drive around in France by myself. And the driver convinced them that I was a wine writer in from the United States because we had an appointment, but they were like, no appointments today. I think they just decided they weren't interested, and they ended up letting us in and then giving us a cellar tour, which was really cool. So, and the woman pretended she didn't speak a lick of English the whole time. And at the very end, when I was talking to our translator, she started speaking English. I think she finally understood that like I cared about the property and I cared about the wines. So it was quite fun. We had a good time in the end, but it was really silly getting into it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I've been a couple times, but believe it or not, I've never been to Clos de Pop.
Oh,
I've
well,
been to a lot of domains, but I've not been there.
now you have to add to your list.
Yeah.
Right.
So Mark, before we started, you shared a story about how you and Curt met. So I'm hoping you can share that with us. And then I have some questions about you have two different projects going on. So we're going to come back to that. But Mark, um, tell us how it is that we now get to buy Curt's wines from you here in Ohio.
Yeah, it's a funny story because Lindsay, Victor, my style of wine definitely leans elegant, fresh. So sometimes in Paso, objectively, obviously it's a sea of amazing wine, but not always my style of wine. So I was fortunate to go with some people to Hospice Daron out in Paso one year. It's probably 4 years ago. And again, objectively, I tasted incredible wine after incredible wine, but just not wines that I'm going home and drinking myself. And I think when you have a portfolio that you're building as a small company, I believe you have to really believe in all the wines and you have to really want to open those wines at home with friends and family or by yourself or whatever. So I left the convention. It was great. Really, really well run. Unfortunately, it's since moved to Walla Walla, or else I would encourage all the listeners to go one year. So the last day, a friend of mine said, we have to check out Sun Liege. So my friend has been drinking Sun Liege wines for a long time. So I said, let's do it. And I knew of the winery, but I wasn't that familiar with the wines. As soon as I tasted the first two wines, I immediately stopped. I said, I have to work with this producer. The wines that Curt makes are so elegant. When you look at them among their peers, there's a different freshness to them. His Grenache, it's no wonder that was, how he fell in love with the Rhone varietals because like Pickpocket, this Grenache is so fresh and so elegant. To me, it reminds me more of those high elevation Grenache that you're seeing in Spain right now than it does anything in the Southern Rhone or the West Coast. So anyway, we started talking. He was it wasn't the right time. We waited about a year, and then he reached back out to me, and we started working together. And one thing I'll say about Curt, I think you're getting the sense of this when you talk to him. He's just such an easy person to work with. So soft spoken, so cool. Doesn't try to tell me how to do things. We just get along well, and he's just been a joy to work with. So the wines to me are incredible. And if we have time, I'd love to just kind of pick his brain on how he maintains that freshness across all of his wines. Even on something like the offering, which you guys poured, for a while there at Flight.
We still do.
Yes, it has, it has the ABV of maybe something you'd expect, but when you taste it, you would never feel that alcohol. You would never say, okay, this is from here. It's just so fresh, so light. Not light, but I would say fresh and lifted would probably be the best way to
Lifted.
describe it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I met Curt. That's how I fell in love with the wines, and I just think they're incredible.
Well, that's nice. I love that. And we
Yeah.
agree. I mean, when we tasted the offering for the first time, it was kind of one of those moments where it was like depth, concentration, a ton of complexity going on, but the whole sip is like super fresh and bright and youthful and lifted, but with like, a good punch of power behind it. So I think that it does take like a very, a deft hand to make all of that happen. So I guess that's a compliment to you, sir, for, making these beautifully balanced wines that are elegant and, complex with a lot going on. And these are, not the easiest grapes. A lot of people I feel like can mess this up. So, but I wanted to just quickly ask you a little bit about the two labels that you have. So Liege and then you have Groundwork. So our members are about to receive Groundwork Chardonnay with their April wine release. And we are pouring Liege, the offering, at the wine bar here. So maybe tell us a little bit about the two projects and what's different about them.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So Sanlige, I started making my own wines in '03, and the first release of Sanlige is 2006. Um, and then in 2007, because I just love like fermentation and making wine, I had this idea to launch a second brand. And we named it Groundwork. So the idea at the time was to stick to their own varietals, but the Groundwork wines would all be single varietals, and the hand in the winemaking would be less winemaker driven. So the thought was, more hands off, a little leaner, a little brighter style, shorter aging cycles, and basically we would be able to say, okay, this is Grenache Blanc, from Paso Robles. This is Grenache. This is Syrah. In a more stripped down version, shorter aging cycle. And the thought was like, these are the foundations of these varietals. And then we build on this understanding um, of what we've learned through the groundwork wines to make the Sanlige wines, which are then more time in barrel, and then more blending. So a little bit more like my fingerprint on it, where the groundwork concept was like, let's try and remove me from the equation as much as possible and present these varietals in a really like straightforward fashion. So that's really how it started. Um, and then we have the Chardonnay in the club, which is like, okay, well, how do we get to Chardonnay from, their own varietal? So um, probably now about 5 years ago, I just had the idea that I should take the same concept of groundwork, but also apply it to the tried and true varietals of the Central Coast. And so I came up with a second branding. So the branding of the classics is what I call them. Um, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Pinot Noir, and Sauv Blanc. Those are mocked up off of the Stag's Leap cab that won the Judgment of Paris and put California on the map. So when I did that, I was just thinking tried and true. And when I got into label development, tried and true, I want to do like a throwback label. I'd never done that before, so I thought that would be cool. And then I started studying old labels, and when I found that, I was like, oh, that like resonates really because that's to me that's the wine supposedly to put California on the map for everyone. So I just kind of traded out the stag for the oak tree, which is the groundwork symbol, because everywhere you go on the Central Coast, you see an oak tree. It's a big part of our culture. Um, you create a lot of things out of oak. It's a very strong wood. But then my favorite part, like our barbecue that we do here is called Santa Maria style barbecue. And we barbecue on a bed of cooked oak coals with an open grate that we raise and lower to regulate temperature. It's a big part of my life. Like this time of year through the summer, we barbecue a lot at the house. Um, and also, we live in like a tiny little house that just has a wood burning stove, so it's also how I keep my family warm all year. So, anyways, the oak's a
Wow.
big part of my life, and I think our culture. So that's why it's the groundwork symbol. And then we traded that out, and then I kind of shifted the font a little bit. But if you study the two labels side by side, they're like extremely similar.
Oh,
Huh.
that's cool.
I didn't know that, so I'm learning too.
Well, and then, conversely, your Somme Liege labels are really different. They're very modern. Some of them feel, a little abstract in certain ways. So, is that just, again, kind of your fingerprint, like getting to do something that feels a little bit more like you?
Yeah, I think that's a great story. But again, we have to like step back in the time machine. Um, so if you go back to 2006 and you think of what wine labels look like every wine label, domestic, most was somebody's name,
Right.
right? So my name is really difficult to pronounce. Put up for the readers, but like most people can't say it or read it. So like that was out right away. And then a lot of people are like, oh, I'm named after my kids. Well, my son's name is Chase. That name been taken. I'm like, that's probably not going to work very well either. So, just going down that whole branding philosophy, I wanted to come up with something different. And so we came up with Saint Liege. And that is based off the fact that everybody that I know that was doing Rhone wines domestically at that time, we're all first generation at it. So it literally translates to without a leader. So the whole idea is all of us making these wines during this period, we're all pioneers and shaping our own history here. And I think that the wines of France should be like a beacon, but we should never be trying to replicate those. We're on our own journey here. I think the Central Coast can offer some really great world-class Rhone varietals, and I'm just be really excited and proud to be a part of this like drive that's been happening for the last 20 years. That's where the name came from, without a leader. So it's not about like rebellion or anything like that. It's about like shaping history, hopefully. Um, and then when we got to the wines themselves, um, I was really inspired by like the Australians. So at the time, the Australians were like naming their wines. So, and I thought that was really cool. Um, and so that was my concept was name a wine and then develop art to match the name. And I had this like really creative buddy named Josh at the time, and he'd come up from San Diego to do harvest with one of my friends. And he was like, I think I'm gonna stay around and try and like help some people with like some label development. And I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. And then the more we're talking, I'd figured out he'd made his mind up like he needed to help me. And I'm like, what's wrong with my label? Anyways, so he put me on this mission one day. Like we went through this process of naming the wines, and then he put me on again back in the time machine. He gave me a bunch of rolls of quarters and sent me to the Cal Poly San Luis Obispo library up into the section with all the art. And he said, I just want you to look through books up there and find a bunch of art that inspires you and then photocopy it and then come back here. And then we'll have a talk about like what direction we want to go. And so that's how it started. And I found these woodcuts from this guy named Lind Ward who'd done like he had these like coffee table books, but each page was just a different woodcut with no words. And his art was like so inspiring to me. And then I found these etchings as well, which was from Gustave Doré, and there was like this version of Dante's Inferno with all these etchings. And so basically Lynn's work and those etchings were like our inspiration for art. And so the offering and the coast to coast, which we call my contemporary labels, those are all based off woodcuts. We developed our own art in Lynn's style. And then the classics, which is the pickpocket that Mark was talking about earlier, another wine called the Adversary, another wine called the Prophetess, another wine called the Ingedi. Those are all direct pieces of those etchings. And we kind of did like a mashup on some of it, which back then also was just starting with music. And so we did it with art. So yeah, it's still a fun conversation to have, but like you got to think this is 20 years ago we were doing this.
Yeah, I love that he sent you to the library.
Right.
Now he'd be sending you online. But yeah, that's really cool that that's how you found inspiration. They're very striking, and very different from the groundwork side of things. Um, one of we tasted something from you again, slightly off topic, but Mark brought around some peak pool that you had. Mark, what was that? It was like a
Yeah, it was a
carbonic.
yeah, carbonic pick bull. I think there was maybe a small touch of Mourvedre in it, possibly. Does that in that vintage, Curt, does that sound right? That there would have been a small touch of Mourvedre in it?
You're close. It's Malvasia.
No, oh,
Amazing.
Malvasia,
Yeah.
but I thought there was a touch of a red grape in there.
Yes. A tiny amount of Malbec in there too.
Malbec is
Malbec.
what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because there
Yeah.
was. I knew there was a small percentage of a red grape, but like less than 5%, like 3% or something along those lines. But yeah, yeah, that was a cool wine. Also, it's been a while, Lindsay, but you guys had also featured a while back the Cunwa.
Oh yeah, I love Kunwa. Big
Yeah,
fan. Yeah, that was
yeah.
really cool. Yeah, it seems like there's just like some fun little like wacky projects you have going on there too, because that peak bowl was like just like really fun, really different. Unlike a lot of things that are floating around, at least in our market. So, and striking label again. As soon as Mark brought it in, I was like, well, I know who this is from. So,
Yeah. Yeah, the
Yeah.
wines are just consistently good across the board. I
yeah,
mean, they're, even the pick pool, it was requested by a customer. It was something I hadn't tasted before. It's probably not something that I thought at the time fit into the portfolio. And I think I opened the first bottle with you randomly, and we
yeah,
were we were both like, "Whoa, this is
yeah,
really, really good." Yeah.
yeah. But anything but classic, you said the word
Yeah.
classics a couple times and
He makes very clean wine too. That's one
yeah,
thing I just want to say. I want to emphasize that because you'll notice on the labels everything's organic. You'll see that it's minimal intervention. There's no herbicides, no pesticides, spontaneous fermentation. But Curt has always said from day one that yes, he will always make as close to a natural wine as possible, but not at the expense of making a dirty wine. So his wine is always clean. I have never tasted a wine from Curt, even the Grenache. I've never sensed any oxidation. So his wines, I think, are very, very, very precise.
yeah. Curt, will you tell us a little bit about the Chardonnay that all of our members are going to be tasting this
Yeah.
spring?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chardonnay to me is my favorite white grape. And I think that it is the ultimate winemaker's grape. So if you really like think about it, I don't know if any other grape can execute so many different styles of wine so well. So you think about like still wine, you can have like you know, acid water, like super racy Chardonnay that's awesome. You can obviously make butter, which, whatever your opinion is on it, like, there's millions of cases it produced a year and people love it. That's the same grape, right? So
Right,
that's like you could do that with winemaker decisions and pick decisions and sourcing. And you think like bubbles, like it's really hard to beat Chardonnay in terms of like traditional method sparkling wine. It's like so delicious. So, um, to me, I'm just like really enamored with what can be done with that grape. And also, it's really not an easy grape to work with. So I think in the beginning that was really fun for me because naively, when I was younger, I thought that like what everybody else was doing must have been easy. And so like, why would I like everybody does Chardonnay? Why do I want to do that? And then when I first started making it, I'm like, oh wow, there's actually a lot to be learned here. So I have a ton of respect for it. But ultimately, where I've landed with Chardonnay is that There are some varietals that are extremely aromatic, like we talked earlier a little bit about Malvasia or, Viognier or Muscat, right? Like you can smell these wines from a foot away in a glass and nail it, like exactly what it is. Chardonnay is not to me a white of aromatics. They can be very pretty, but it's not really an aromatic varietal. To me, it's a wine of textures.
Yeah.
So when I'm going into crafting Chardonnay, I'm thinking in my mind like, okay, we're gonna play with different textures here. And you guys have said so many kind things about me and my wines, but one thing that is really important to me is that my wines are always refreshing. So, I always want somebody to have that experience with the glass and want to go back and grab it again. And I have a lot of respect for wines that are a little bigger and more cocktail style. That's cool. That's not what I'm trying to do. I want that. For me, the best moment is when somebody goes to grab the bottle and pour and it's empty. Or like you pour that last pour because you want to just drink it because it's refreshing, right? So that's
Yeah.
like the ultimate goal, like in a very simple form with all the wines, white to red. So that's like the minimum where we start building the foundation. I want the Chardonnay to be like racy and refreshing. So to do that, you got to pick some really early, which gives you, a really light style wine, but you need to have the acid for it to be refreshing. So then what happens, I start playing with going back to textures, barrels. So with this wine, we did 85% of the wine in old neutral barrels, fermented in these barrels, and then aged the wine on the lees in these barrels. So this has given us like this foundation of richness and some texture, not necessarily like toasted flavor profiles because the barrels were old. And then 15% of it in stainless steel that's just like super zippy, super clean. Um, and then, at the end going into the blending, that's where it ended up, I have enough projects going on that I don't need to make everything work. So I actually could come down to blending those two components and trying to find the best of both worlds of like that mouthfeel and that richness, and then also that like really zippy finish. So that's kind of like, I think hopefully what I'm showcasing here is the best of what Chardonnay can offer. And like, this is a wine that I'm like, I really love. I actually had it last night, because I knew we were gonna like do this today. And yeah, I had it last night, probably opened it at like maybe 65 degrees, which just because I hadn't thought ahead enough to get it cool. But I love to have white wine a little warmer too, because I think if there's anything wrong with the wine, it's like gonna show up, and you
Right.
could always chill wine and hide some flaws. But like at that temperature, it was still awesome, you know. So I was very happy, like we released this wine a bit ago, so I'm so glad that it's still holding up, and I think it's nowhere close to like the end of its evolution.
Yeah. I like the idea of temperature being so important when it comes to textural wines, because it feels like what's going on the palate, that those creamy things are sort of like the base note of an experience of wine. And I feel like you're right. When they're too cold, you really can't experience that part. It all feels kind of very linear. But I think that's one of the things I do love most about Chardonnay is the texture and how versatile it is. And we are on a mission to continue to try and remind people how great Chardonnay can be here, because it is polarizing. You either have had a really good experience and you found something you love, or you've had a really bad experience and you've written it off. And I just feel like you can't do that with a grape like Chardonnay. There's just too much out there, too much to experience. So we forge ahead
Right.
and we share more Chardonnay with people. So
Right.
we're excited to get this bottle in everybody's hands.
Nice.
Victor or Mark, do you guys have any questions? I feel like I've hogged all the questions. There were so many.
Really quickly, just because we were talking about like the serving temperature of wine and how important it could be to like the experience itself. I was just wondering, what would be your serving temperature recommendations, and if you could, give us some suggestions as to like food pairings, whether it's snacks or full meal or things of the sort.
Yeah. I think with that wine, just for folks at home, I'd probably say throw it in the fridge for like 20 minutes, refrigerator temperature, pull it out. And then, I mean, obviously, depending how long it's going to take you to consume it, but like, let's just say that you had a little bit of a group and you could pull it out of the fridge after 20 minutes. I'd say, if, then leave it out and experience it, for the next 45 minutes as it changes temperature would probably be my ideal recommendation. Now, obviously, if you're drinking it by yourself, that might not work, right? But, if you're in a group, I'd say up to 45 minutes outside the fridge would be cool. Um, but yeah, I think if you could have that experience with it right out of the refrigerator cold and then have it as it's warming up, that's going to be pretty fun to see the textures evolve, like Lindsay was talking about. And then, yeah, food, I think, yeah, I don't know. You do the food thing's always so fun because you do the yin or the yang, right? So like you want to go with something that's going to complement or go against it. But I think that this wine, like a lot of salads would be beautiful pairing. Cheese is obviously great. Um, even the winter, I think like some like broth soups, um, or even like creamy. So I think like maybe go either way with that. The creamy would probably be the yin and the yang deal.
Sure.
Um, and the broth soups maybe a little more like on the same palate tone. Um, but I think that this wine's really fun because you could do like warm meals or cooler meals. Um, I think fish, we eat a lot of fish at our house, so that's like a no-brainer there too. Um, maybe an Indian food. I don't know. Like I'd probably drink it with most things.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Um,
that's the beauty of Chardonnay. I mean, it's a Swiss
yeah,
Army
Yeah.
knife when it comes to food pairings. I mean, it's especially with a little bit of oak, but still being racy and linear, as you said. I think you could get away with quite a bit with that wine.
yeah,
I'm a classic believer in the roasted chicken and Chardonnay combination. I don't know what that like, just like fresh lemon, roasted chicken, salad, Chardonnay.
yeah,
You're
Yeah.
golden. I'm
yeah.
hungry now.
I know. Like one of our go-tos at the winery, like we got a bunch of people, is like we'll do like a chicken over the Santa Maria grill over the oak, um, fresh baguette and brie and rocket salad. Like that's
Yeah.
like we can whip up that so quick and feed so many people. And I think that would be a great one with the Chardonnay too. Well, I know it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, I've done it before. It
Yeah.
works. Tested. Two more questions for you. If our guests want to explore more wines, this might actually be more for Mark, but what other wines by Curt are here in the market in Ohio that our guests could purchase if they would like to inquire?
Yeah. So I think one that I would really, really, really encourage people to taste. Curt and I actually, ironically, independent of this upcoming podcast, we had a conversation about the Grenache. This is the third time I think on this podcast we've referenced Pickpocket. It's a Grenache that Curt makes. When you taste it, depending on what your perception of Grenache was, you may not have realized that Grenache could be this fresh and this elegant and this light. I mean, the color looks more like what people are familiar with Pinot Noir than it does with maybe most, of the bigger brand Garnachas or even the Southern Rhone Grenache. It's one that, comes in a few dollars higher, but if you want to get a true reference point of Grenache, you really need to taste Pickpocket. In fact, I think the Cleveland News, they just, it was one of the wines that was featured last week just because a prominent sommelier featured it and said some of the same things I did. The offering, I would say, is probably, and Curt, correct me if I'm wrong, probably you could call that your flagship wine, right? I mean, the offering has always been a staple.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you haven't tried the offering, I mean, for sure, pop into Flight because Flight's pouring it by the glass. In the Groundwork line, the Cabernet Sauvignon, I know you've worked with that before, Lindsay.
We've poured that.
I love it because it's Paso AVA, but in Paso, a lot of times you lose we'll say, typicity of Cabernet Sauvignon. You don't get that pyrazine thing. You can't really detect it oftentimes as Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think Curt does a great job of keeping it. I think it's only 14% alcohol, which is quite low for Paso, but you can tell, you can smell, you can taste that it is Cabernet Sauvignon. And I love that. And if you wanted to try something fun, I would say definitely try the Picpoul or the Cunwa because they're really unique. They're carbonic maceration, but they're really food friendly. And I think they're just super interesting wines. And Curt makes plenty of other wines. There's some new ones we're talking about bringing into Ohio. But I would say with what is currently in Ohio and available right now, that is kind of a summary of those wines.
Love it. And Curt, if our guests make their way out to the Central Coast, how do they come find you?
Yeah, so I actually have two tasting rooms, believe it or not. So I have one on the coast in Pismo Beach, and that was the first tasting room I opened. So we've had that now since 2009. And it was because I was making the wine in a warehouse in like the middle of nowhere that I couldn't have people. And we finally got to the point that like enough people were wanting to come taste that we should probably open our own spot. So we opened that place and it's been open since then. And then I moved the winery from this industrial zone down in Santa Barbara County up to where I am now in Paso Robles, this area called Tin City. So the winery is an area called Tin City. There are close to 30 producers in my neighborhood. Um, we have somebody also making beer. We have a couple distilleries. We have somebody making ice cream, somebody making pasta, somebody making cheeses. So it's this really cool neighborhood of what I like to say, like bootstrap artisanal, owner operators. So that is where the wines are made, and we have a tasting room at the winery, and then we still have our satellite location on the coast in Pismo Beach. So either one, and if you let me know in advance through Lindsay that you're coming out, I'll do my best to be there and say hi too.
Love it. Love it. Well, you guys heard that here first. Email me if you're going out to visit. A huge thank you, Curt, so much for your time and taking time from your vacation to chat with us. We love your wines. We're a huge fan. We're very excited to share our the Chardonnay with our members. And Mark, thank you for bringing these gorgeous wines to Ohio and making sure that Victor and I are aware of their existence. We love it. Keep it coming. And if you ever make it to the Ohio market, please come visit us. We'd love to meet you in person, maybe do an event or just hang out and drink some good wine, maybe some Clos de Pop.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Curt, I really
Amazing.
appreciate it, especially with you being, on the vacation. Thanks for always making yourself available. And thanks to Lindsay and Victor for being one of the biggest proponents of your wines. So,
No, I mean I'll tell you what, like we're sitting here and I just had one of those moments in the back of my head, because we're talking about like when it started and 20 years ago, and like I just had this like feeling like, man, you are so lucky. Like you like chased this dream and you're here and now I'm like talking to people in another part of the country that are supporting your wines and then like it enough that they're sharing it with like their great supporters. And like I just want you to know this is not lost on me and I'm very grateful. I love what I do and I appreciate the support like immensely. So yeah, thanks so much. We're all in this together. So you guys allow me to get to chase my dream and do what I love every day. And I can't say enough about that. Thank you so much.
Well, we
thank
love
you.
hearing that. Thank you so
Thank
much to
you.
end
Appreciate
on
it.
those
Thank
wonderful
you.
words from Curt. Well,
Hmm.
go vacation.
Yeah.
We'll send you all the good vacation vibes, and it was really lovely getting to meet you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Yep.
Anything.